All right, I'm back. That phone call was from the lady I was going to work for today. She's not feeling well, which is kind of what I thought was going to happen, so I'm not surprised. And so she's not up to doing anything today. So we're not going to do any work today. I have the day off. Then is what that means. Um. Anyway. Um. Yeah. So it ends up that I'll get back to my story now. I was talking about. I hope the lady feels well soon. Anyway, it's an awful ordeal for her. Her health being the way it is. It's not a whole lot of fun. That's for sure. And the weather does affect her, so I wasn't entirely surprised to receive that call. I was just getting ready to call her after I finished this story. But anyway, getting back to the story though. Um. Um. The show was called Crossfire. I actually just looked it up again because I do have the recording of it, and I did look it up, and it's called Crossfire, and it was in May of 1983, which is about right. It would have been about May of 1983 that I saw it, and I actually have saved the show on a list of saved things. Anyway, the congressman's name is Larry McDonald, and he was debating Pat Buchanan and Tom Braden. Tom Braden was an older man at the time and a government man, and so was Pat Buchanan was a government man too. Tom Braden was furious with Larry McDonald, because Larry McDonald was talking about a lot of things that Tom Braden did not want talked about. And basically, Larry McDonald said, it's corruption. It's just corruption. The whole thing is corruption. Nothing is as it seems. Um, Nothing is as we are told it is. Everything is corruption. Well, that piqued my interest because I had always felt that way since I was a little kid. So I'm watching this show anyway, and Larry McDonald is doing a pretty good job roasting Tom Braden. Tom Braden's really getting furious, and you could tell he could barely contain himself. He was so mad. And anyway, the other fella, Pat Buchanan, was a little more open. He challenged Larry McDonald on a few points, but he was at least willing to listen to the man. Tom Braden was not. Tom Braden was just basically shut your mouth. Stop talking about these things, you idiot. That's pretty much was Tom Braden's reaction. So right there, I thought, okay, there's something to this. That old fellow wouldn't be getting as mad as he's getting if there wasn't something to it. He knows that McDonald is saying some stuff that he really probably shouldn't be saying. Like, he knows McDonald isn't just a kook. McDonald actually knows some things, and he's now saying them. And that's what's got him worked up. I was able to see that. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe this is part of the reason I've been feeling like there's something badly wrong in the world. And of course, being in the situation I was in at the time, I was basically unjustly imprisoned. And, even the fact that that could happen, um, was more proof that there's something badly wrong in the world. Anyway, it ended up, that was in May of 1983. I was released from the reformatory at the end of August 1983. In September of 1983, a Korean Airlines jetliner somehow ended up in Russian airspace. Now bear in mind, this was during the Cold War, and it ended up flying over a sensitive area of Russia, a place where they had military installations and missile silos and things like that. A place where you weren't supposed to be in an airplane. At least not without the Russian government knowing you were there. But of course, all governments had the technology even back then to detect aircraft in their airspace. They had radar and so on, and especially in a sensitive place like that. So the Russian Air Force sent some fighter jets up to intercept this plane and to try to communicate with them, to basically say, hey, you're not supposed to be here. Why are you here? Well, they didn't get any response from the plane. They tried raising them on the radio and so on. Didn't get any response, so eventually they shot the plane down. Everybody on it was killed. One of the people on that plane was Larry McDonald. This is just months after he was on this show. Now they really had my attention. I mean, they just killed this guy. It turns out after the Cold War ended, in the early 1990s, the government in Russia released a bunch of previously classified files. Now, one of the things was the report about this KLM airliner that they had shot down over their airspace, over their territory. Of course, after they shot it down, they collected the wreckage and they analyzed it. The navigation system on the plane had been tampered with. The radio equipment on the plane had also been tampered with. And so that plane was set up to fly into a place where it would be shot down with Larry McDonald aboard it. Now, of course, not only he was killed, everybody on the plane was killed. It was a passenger airliner. So there were many members of the public who were killed on it as well. The crew was killed. Everybody died. There are no survivors in that type of a situation. Basically, Larry McDonald was murdered, and all the other people who died with him were collateral damage. That's really what happened there. He talked about things they didn't want talked about. Now, see, we didn't have internet in those days, though, and it took a long time for things to come out. You get a little bit of information here, a little bit of information there. Of course, now we have the internet. So what happens is you get a flood of information because everybody's sharing their ideas, their theories, their inside information, if they have any, and so on like that. Larry McDonald went on Crossfire, and he shared some of it. Funny thing is, at the end of the interview, Larry McDonald wasn't in his chair anymore. He was gone. And it was just Tom Braden and Pat Buchanan sitting there. And Tom Braden was still seething mad. And Pat Buchanan, to his credit, he says to Tom Braden, because Tom Braden was saying that guy's a kook, he don't know what he's talking about, and on like that. And Pat Buchanan said, well, he got quite a rise out of you. He said, that kind of tells me that he might know a little more than he seems to know. That's kind of where they left it. It was something along those lines. It wasn't exactly that, but it was something like that. Like, I think maybe that guy knows more than you're saying, than you are saying he knows, basically, based upon your reaction just now. And so it ended up, and I guess Larry McDonald was heavily into the John Birch Society and stuff like that, which, again, Tom Braden took umbrage to that and so on, and kind of ridiculed him for that, and on it went. But anyway, Larry McDonald was basically he was taken out. And these people who took him out are so ruthless that they not only took him out, they took a bunch of other people out who had nothing to do with it at the same time. They set the Russian government up to do the dirty deed for them. We came very close to nuclear war over that incident. That incident could have resulted in nuclear war. This is all to shut one man up because he said some stuff on television that they didn't want said. That's how ruthless these people are. And so, like I say, when I was growing up, my dad was a questioner of authority. He didn't just believe everything he was told. I remember him telling me when I was a little boy, he said, if you ever get arrested in this country, be aware that you don't have any rights. He said, you have whatever rights the police tell you you have, and that's it. Whatever rights they decide you have, he said, those are your rights. You have whatever rights the police decide you have if you get arrested in this country. He said, people think that it's like the United States, but it isn't. He said, people watch too many American television shows and they think that Canada is the same, but it isn't. And he said, you really don't have any rights in this country. I remember him telling me that when I was a kid. I remember one time we had a girl in our class when I was in grade 6, and she was, I guess you could say, developmentally delayed or something. And she used to come up with some pretty dumb stuff. And I never picked on her. Some people did. I didn't. But she said something to me one time that wasn't right. And I just corrected her. I said, oh no, I said, that's not what it is. I said, it's actually this other thing. And I was right. It was the other thing. But I can't even remember what it was now. But it was something she said to me that what she said was actually the opposite of how the situation was. And I said, oh no, I said, that's not it. I said, it's this other thing. Well, she didn't like that. And she told me, at recess time, I'm going to kick your ass. And I said, no, you're not. Don't be silly. You're not going to do that at all, I said. I'm not going to fight with you. I said, I don't fight with a girl. I said, so no, I said, that's not going to happen. Well, at recess time, she come charging at me. Back in the backfield, which was our playground. I put my hands up to block because she was trying to hit me in the face. And I put my arm up like this to block her, and I was wearing a watch. And if you remember the old expandable metal watch bands, that's what I had, Anyway, I got my watch on my wrist. I put my arm up like this to block her, I think it must have been, I wore it on my left wrist, so it'd be like this. I put my arm up to block her. And I think I was trying to push her away with my other hand, with my right hand. But I had my wrist up like this, my arm like that, and I was trying to push her back, I think. Now, without actually hitting her, but just to let her know, no, you're not doing this. Anyway, she was pretty relentless, and she wasn't backing off. And at one point, she grabbed my watch band, and she tore my watch off. Basically, the watch band was wrecked. She tore my watch off. Well, the teacher on yard duty saw what happened. And anyway, when our teacher saw what happened, he said to her, well, you broke his watch band. You broke his property. So she said, you have to make that. He said, you got to make that right. He said, you got to replace the thing that you broke. So he said, I'm going to need you to bring a new watch band in for him, seeing as how you broke his old one. And so she said, that won't be a problem. My dad has a drawer full of them at home. Well, her dad was an OPP officer. And he was kind of known to be corrupt, this guy, too. He had a reputation for being really miserable and really corrupt. Of course, they're all kind of corrupt, but this guy stood out amongst the crooks, He was really corrupt. Anyway, that night I come home, and of course I've got my watch in my pocket. I showed my mother what I showed it to my mother, and of course, when my dad came home from work, he saw it. She made a point of showing it to him. And so I was called out to the kitchen for a meeting about this situation. I was asked what happened. If I had done any wrong in that situation, I'd have been punished. But anyway, my dad was satisfied with what I told him, that I hadn't done anything wrong, that it was just one of those situations. And anyway, I told him, and I said, don't worry about the watch band. I said, she's bringing another one in for me tomorrow. She says her dad has a drawer full of them. And my dad, he says, yeah, probably all stuff that never made it to the evidence locker. About this cop, eh? Well, she did bring in a watch band for me the next day. And when I tried to put it on my watch, it fell apart. It literally fell to pieces, this watch band did. But anyway, that was my replacement watch band. So we had to go out and buy a brand new one anyway. That was all for my watch. But the thing literally fell to pieces. So they made a point of giving me a watch band that was no good anyway, that you couldn't use. But anyway, but like I say, most people back then wouldn't dare say anything like that, imply that a police officer would actually divert evidence back to his own house. But my dad wasn't shy about it at all. That was the first thing he thought when I told him that. And that's what he said. He said, yeah, probably all stuff that never made it to the evidence locker. So, I grew up with a very skeptical father. My mother was different. My mother just believed in authority unconditionally, and she still pretty much does. But my father, he was very much a questioner of authority. He used to see a lot of the folly of these people and so on. I remember this is kind of funny actually, when I was in grade 1, the Watergate hearings were going on. This was back like in 1974, in that era. And I had brought my reader home. I had a reader, if you remember the old Dick and Jane readers, that's what it was anyway. And of course, Richard Nixon, the president who was being impeached, and they were having the hearings about him, they used to call him Dick. They used to call him Tricky Dicky and that sort of thing, eh? And, Richard, Dick, Well, anyway, after supper, my mom's washing the dishes. My dad went into the living room and sat down in his big black Naugahyde lazy boy chair. Of course, turned on the television and was watching the news. And of course, they're covering the Watergate hearings. And so he's watching the Watergate hearing, and I'm in the kitchen in the next room reading from my reader, and there was a line. I'm reading out loud, and there's a line. And the line was, Dick lives in the White House. And from the living room, my dad yells, not anymore, he doesn't. So that was something. Not anymore, he doesn't. Anyway, Dick lives in the White House. Not anymore, he doesn't. So there you go, with Dick and Jane. Anyway, I don't know what happened with Dick and Jane. I don't know if they ever got together or what. Maybe they're married now and they might be married and have grandchildren by now. Who knows? Anyway, but yeah, not anymore, he doesn't. No, not anymore, he doesn't. Anyway, so that was my dad. He was very skeptical of authority. He was very skeptical about Canada. He recognized that it isn't as it's advertised, that most things aren't as they're advertised. And I think he had just seen a lot of corruption in his own life and a lot of stupidity. And so he knew that these people aren't the great superheroes and the great noble characters that they're made out to be. He understood that these were people who were just as flawed as anybody else. just as prone to corruption as anybody else, and really were never held to account properly, like most people would be. Anyway, but that's just a little background for you. That's how I got to be the way I am with authority. And it isn't just that. A lot of other things have happened over the years. That was just a start. That was just the beginning for me of, like I say, I always felt like something was wrong. And then when all that happened with Larry McDonald in 1983, then I pretty much knew that something was wrong. I still didn't know exactly what it was or how bad it was. It took a lot of years to find that out. In fact, it was only when the internet came into existence, only when I got on the internet. Well, even the internet was in existence for a long time before I was on it, too. I only got on the internet around 2015. So, like I say, I've only been on the internet for like 11 years. But of course, on the internet, you have continuous access to all sorts of information, and you can double check sources and so on like that. Anyway, the bottom line is, those feelings that I had back in the 1970s about how the world was, they turned out to be pretty accurate, really. I mean, the world is that way. And of course, like I say, over the years, through my childhood and into my adolescence and into my adult life, I experienced corruption firsthand, dealing with police and so on, and the courts and on like that. So, yeah, I was aware that, yeah, it's a corrupt shithole of a place, but it turns out it's even worse than I thought it was. But what are you going to do? I just don't cooperate, and I'm openly critical of it, because those are the things that I can do. They come at a cost, though. You don't do anything against the powers that be, and you don't refuse to cooperate without there being a cost. So there's always a cost. But there's a cost to participating and to cooperation and to keeping your mouth shut, too. Doesn't matter which road you go down, there's going to be a cost either way. So it's just, what price do you want to pay? That's all. Anyway, we'll see you later.